Welcome to a very special episode of Spiritual Asshole. I am currently with the Sean Clayton, a founder of Abundance 10,000. We're in his house. We're in Austin. Sean, thanks for having me.
Dude, great to be here, man. This is awesome.
Great to be here in his own house. That's how grateful this man is. So, Sean, I wanted to talk to you again because for so many reasons, you were one of my favorite interviews I've ever had.
Oh, bless you, dude.
Yeah.
You're just saying that because I'm at your house.
You're
at my house.
Yeah, because I also want to. You just got a sprinkler system and I want to live here. One of the reasons why I'm fascinated by your story and your overall ethos is I've never met anyone who's had such a clearly high mountain to climb and get over it, and now you're just good. You know, you've overcome sexual abuse, jail, divorce, suicide attempts, and now you're thriving. Is that because you finally switched to Verizon?
Definitely not Verizon. I'm a current T-Mobile customer and I get kind of crappy signal every now and then, but I don't think they'll ever sponsor me, so it'll be fine.
Do you see yourself that way? Do you see yourself as somebody who's gotten over this hill and you're like surfing now? Because that's how I see you.
I see it all as an opportunity and really a reward for me to love myself differently. And so all of it was absolutely part of a divine plan for me to show up the way I needed to show up today. And what'll be interesting is that it'll all be even more encompassing because it helped me, what I call set this foundation or this permanent rhythm in my life, that I could use that trauma and all that BS that people call it, that create distance, usually create distance and suffering. And once I realized it was my greatest gift, then it turned into something that I could actually build mountains on top of from my mind, not the actual suffering or the construct of other people's.
So do you think what's tripping all of us up when we carry our trauma is that we don't treat it as a gift and we treat it as like our story? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, the world has given us, I have this thing that I call a rhythmic state of permanence.
Yeah.
And you can either see it, like Napoleon Hill had it, he called it the hypnotic rhythm in his book, Outwitting the Devil. But one of the things that I recognize is that most people in the world, what they end up doing is they draw a linear timeline to somebody else's definition. In that linear timeline, they end up staying in this like rhythmic state of permanence off of that suffering. And then they look at it over and over again as the same thing, because what does the world do? The world concedes and actually agrees that that is suffering. So take sexual abuse, for instance. The minute I tell somebody that I was sexually abused between 9 and 14, the first thing they do is, I'm so sorry you had to deal with that, da. Now, if I fall into their way of seeing it, then I start to become a victim. I start to look for pity. I start to say, oh, well, people actually make me feel better about it because they see it as something that was sad. And in that reflection of sadness, what ends up happening is I can feel a little bit better about the fact that I got really fucked up at a young age. But it's only a little bit better. When I see it as this like really explosive gift, and I'm looking at it and saying, okay, this was like such a win for me to actually have experienced that. Not the fact that what happened was like a win itself, but the ripple effects that it created from me loving myself at that moment to be able to have that to show up in a different state of resilience now is such a different perspective to look at it through. And I no longer subscribe to what the world says is good and bad associated with it. I just see it as one big aspect of wholeness that absolutely put me on a divine journey of wholeness now.
Do you think part of the reason that you were sexually assaulted from ages 9 to 14 was because you were so hot?
Not at all, dude. I was an ugly stage for me.
No way, man. You're a good guy. Do you ever look back though and think it could be worse? Like you could have been rollerblading?
I was rollerblading at the time.
That's why it happened.
Yeah. It was a combination.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. Whenever rollerblading. So this is fascinating. So to stop you quickly, when you talked about going back and loving yourself at that moment, that's all in your mind. To be able to go back and say, this happened to me, I'm going to jump to this timeline moment, I'm going to clear it by loving myself at that point. Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
so I usually go into these Hermetic principles, right?
Yeah.
And the Hermetic principles, I've just recoined them the law of you, because most people, when they take like certain language and certain words, they look at it and they're like, oh, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't want to be a Christian. I don't want to be a Muslim. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be any of these things, because it feels like it creates an aspect of separation. So it's hard to say that there aren't things called laws. It's hard to say that there aren't things called you. So if you and laws put that together, then you actually start to say, well, what are the laws of me? And what I found is that anytime I try to go around these, I want to answer the question. No. Anytime I try to go around these Hermetic principles, what ends up happening is I end right back up in them, and I can't, as much as I have looked to try to find a way around them, and I think about this stuff a lot, you can't find a way around them. So the first principle is basically like the universe is mental, right? And it's basically seated in the mind of the all. So the mind itself is the all, right? And the all is the mind. So if the mind is the all and the all is the mind, that means that what is our mind, it's basically a reflection of Source God All.
Yeah.
So if it's a reflection of Source God All, then what I have to basically seed myself in is saying, okay, well, how would God actually see this? How would all actually see this? And if I understand that perspective of it, God didn't create anything not to love itself more.
Yes.
Okay, even in the splintering of creation, the moment that God went from I am to who am I, that moment in time was still an aspect of love because it created these infinite experiences of self. And in that infinite experiences of self, we showed up to basically love God back. So in order for us to overcome it, then in order to love God back, what do we have to do? We have to love the illusion of all the things that have kept us between ourselves and God, all, or Source. And what are those things? It's the trauma. It's the ego. It's sometimes even like the really loving things that get us caught in more love that basically say, okay, we don't need anything else but that person, and we create a codependent relationship. Even all of that is
our choices too, I think, is a big one. Loving
Exactly.
the choices that we made, so not having regrets.
Yeah.
Because that's easy to have regrets.
All of it, yeah. All of it was stepping stones. And if you know that you built those stepping stones and then you use the memories to recognize that I basically built out this permanent structure, and then I can vibrate off of that structure into building more structures. And the faster that they vibrate, the more solid that they get. Just like any matter in the world, this is the evidence that we've given ourselves. The law of correspondence is that matter vibrating faster becomes harder, right? Take anything in the periodic table. So now you take anything in the periodic table, right? It vibrates faster, it gets harder.
A dick.
So, yeah, a dick works too. Yeah. High vibration dick, right?
It's all about high vibe big.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
And so the faster that vibrates, the stronger that it gets. And then we have the ability to alchemize anything out of vibration. Therefore, you go to that next law, which is energy, right? So everything is vibration, everything is energy. The faster I vibrate it, the more that it gets there. What's the highest vibration of self is love. So as long as we love the thing, we actually put a different permanence on it. It becomes more solid. We're no longer confused about it. And then we end up in a state where we actually show up in a different state of wholeness.
I love that. So Peter Crone said one of the biggest addictions human beings have is their memory. Yeah. So what is a healthy way to carry your memories forward so you're not recreating them in the current moment? I think that's what so many I was talking about this last night. It's like so many of us had trauma, so now we're in this fight or flight state, almost constantly looking for it and not allowing more love, and we have these crazy walls up.
Yeah. So that one's interesting because we are addicted to our memories, but we should be addicted to our memories. We should, now take away the word addiction, but we should be in love with our memories. And if we become addicted to love, that means we have a dependency on love, which is okay to have. And the thing that we're looking for when I recognize that I went through the process of searching for is looking for the reason that those memories were there. And if we rationalize the reason that those memories are there, because the world has told us that if we actually have some sympathetic nervous system response about it, and the rest of the world has the same response, well, that's the reason they're there. They're there for me to protect myself. They're there for me to actually become safe, when that's not true at all.
Yes.
The reality of it is it's true is that we can actually get in space. They're there for us to love them. They're there for us to even us remembering ourselves as children. And there's a lot of people do like inner child work. Yeah. So you do that so you can go back and love it. It's real simple. So if you do the inner child work, then you're going back to that version of yourself, applying a different energy on it, and then loving that little you back into your big you. And then what happens, you combine those two things together.
Serious.
And that's no different than the relationship that we have, once again, back to the law of correspondence with God. So if we have that same thing with God, we're the little you to the big you, and God is basically saying, I love you. No, will you just listen to me? And all we're needing to do is create enough space for that little us to listen to us. But how do we do that? We do it the same way that God's been getting our attention. That the all's been getting our attention. So if the all's been getting our attention and saying, hey, I'm giving you all of this for you to love you, and we can see it and say, I trust you. And then also forgive God for the creation of what it was that we went through. While it's also forgiving us, then what do? We basically merge back together.
Right. So you said something so important, which is we put up these walls because we're trying to protect ourselves or think there's a threat. But by doing that, we are cutting off a certain amount of love, right? So we're like, oh, okay, there's threats, all this trauma happened to me. I gotta be safe, I gotta be careful. But by doing that, you shut down a lot. You're not letting in love. And this explains dating in your late 30s. Because all of us have been so broken and hurt by people. I have a joke about this in my stand-up that like literally on the first date, it's like, let's talk about our trauma already. And like, you're constantly like looking for red flags, but instead of like being able to drop those walls would be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say an amazing first date conversation would be like, we can open up the bucket of trauma, but let's talk about why we created all this trauma to love ourselves. You know, and that would be like, you know, if you took that playbook to a date and you could start having that conversation with somebody, the minute that you actually reflect the cleanness of yourself to another person, one or two things will happen. Maybe we would run for the hills because they're like, this is fucking crazy. I'm not wanting to deal with this.
Yeah.
Or they will end up in the space to where they're like, okay, I need to actually clean my mirror too. And then it becomes one of those things where the reflection of each other starts to create this connection. And, you know, anybody can be for anybody. But the reality of it is once you show up for yourself, the right person shows up for you.
What if the other thing they say is, hey, why are we at Applebee's? What the fuck are we doing here?
That's also, you're giving them a test, right?
If a girl's down for that conversation, then you know you found a very good girl.
You found the one.
You found the one. I mean, get the fuck out of here. All right, so we mentioned this earlier. You have done a shitload of clearing and trauma work. You've done tons of plant medicine, the Hoffman process, your work with Joe Dispenza, the time you went to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle rehab. Keanu Reeves School of Not Thinking. One of the questions I asked you, and I want you to talk about this more, is do you think that we kind of have to go through this trauma clearing in order to get to this really enlightened place that you're at right now, or can we leapfrog it?
I know we can leapfrog it.
Yeah.
It requires us to be open enough.
Yes.
There are, how do I put this? And this is why I'm so prudent about talking about these 7 laws, because if I understand the things that made me me, then it's easy for me to find the doors that I've shut from preventing me from getting back into myself. And most people that I meet who end up staying in a space where they're like just afraid to find that doorway back to themselves, they've done it because once again, they're stuck in this like aspect of separation. So generally the 2 doors that I find that people can walk through in order to shortcut the whole process. It's not shortcutting it, it's just like getting right into yourself. Is understanding there's a separation and a distance between like the illusion of duality. And so one of the laws is the law of polarity, right? And that everything is like all encompassed, but there's like extensions and extremes of both sides. So if there's extension and extreme for both sides, anything that I say that has an opposite to it means that it actually has a wholeness to it. So, you know, it's funny, I posted this thing this morning on Beyonce.
Yeah.
You know? And the minute that I did it, there were a lot of people that got into it, a lot of people that were like, she's the devil, she's this and she's that. I'm like, one, where's the proof? Okay. But number 2, like there's no isness to that statement. So I always look at, is there a fact to that statement? Number 2, you know, the fact that somebody is reaching so deep into this aspect of polarity, like if she be an angel, if she be a demon, who the fuck cares?
Who cares? Yeah.
She is a reflection of God just as much as we are. But the thing of it is that the minute that we start to basically put somebody else in a box, there's something in us that's also in that box.
Yes.
And when we start seeing things through the lens of like the full polarity of it, the full expansion of it, and we see everything all as one, the doorway to truth is significantly faster. And you no longer are looking for the reason to separate, you're looking for the reason to connect. And so every experience in your life, and then this goes into the trauma work, once you see it all as wholeness, then all of the trauma is a gift because it's no longer trauma, right? Yeah. Once you see it all as, you know, you see it all as beautiful, all as love, you see your fears as love, and you have the ability to just constantly move and switch those really quickly, you're no longer in that space of fear. And so that's door number 1 that you can go through. It's really, to me, an easier door because it's just an exercise. It's an awareness exercise. The other thing is that the law of correspondence kind of tied to the law of rhythm. So the law of correspondence tells me that everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
And so I can basically take little things and see the bigger aspect of it. So if I take myself and my childhood self was a reflection of my older self, it's the same relationship that God has with us. So if I start healing that younger self all the time, and I look at it with that compassion and love, what's that younger self going to do? It's going to start growing up. And God has been doing that the whole time in our lives. The all has been doing, the universe, source, whatever you want to call it, the whole time for us. We're just not paying attention to it. So if I understand the law of correspondence and I see all these signs in my life that it's getting my attention, and there's no accidents to it, then I can move through that door of correspondence, but then it requires me to have a discipline between either the polarity or the correspondence to where there's a rhythm that I'm always in, and I create what I call that rhythmic state of permanence, to where I can basically increase the vibration of my intentions and the way that I think in order to vibrate up into that different state. And most people say, well, if you just think differently, it'll become different. But how hard is it to think different? Because we've been programmed for 40 years to think different. So you have to find doors back into your thoughts that eliminate the illusion, and you know that there's a truth to it, because you know that there's good and bad, and you know that those two things, if you put them on a straight line, are extensions of each other. And even the world gives us a north and south pole.
Yeah.
You know, even if you look at atomic structure, all the science gives us polarity. Everything gives us polarity. So the truth of everything is in it. Even the visual spectrum of light has polarity in it. You have white and black, and you know, all the shit in between.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, well, you see the polarity in everything. So is it not possible for us to actually understand the polarity in our thoughts ourselves and the way that we show up in life, and then start to merge those two things together so we can get the full rainbow of ourselves, of love, and how we show up on a daily basis?
I do think people are going to listen to this and go, but look at what drugs did for Sean. Look how good this is. Like, that's what I'm thinking. Or they also might be thinking, I don't think Beyonce's the devil.
and to answer, I mean, one thing about the, you know, and I never like to call it drugs. We can call it whatever we want to call it. No, it's okay.
It's a shortcut.
Yeah, but we can call it drugs if we want. But the thing of it is like the plant medicine, you know, I don't feel like I have any dependency on that.
Totally.
But I know that what it does is I developed this program called Nowism. And in Nowism, it allows me to go from practice to accountability to ceremony.
Yes.
And when you look at through the law of correspondence, the walk of Christ, that actually he had practice, things he did every single day. He had accountability. He had his brothers, his sisters, Mary Magdalene, his mother, all these people that held him accountable. He had ceremony. He was doing plant medicine. The sacrament was plant medicine. So he was opening his mind to see things he never saw before. And then he was taking that and putting it back into practice. And then him and his brothers were holding each other accountable. And then they were opening their mind up again. And so they were constantly expanding instead of contracting. And it allowed them to be able to perform miracles in a very meaningful way that most people weren't able to do. And we have access to that same technology, if you want to call it, the same medicine, the same thing.
I want to go back to what you're talking about with trauma and just being like, just change your thoughts. I think one of my biggest frustrations, and I talked to you about this, is with modern spirituality, is a lot of times it's like, be positive, just love. And I do feel like if you're stacked with trauma, and this has been, I'm not saying I've been stacked with trauma, but if you have trauma or if you have a hard time just loving or just feeling better, you almost feel worse about yourself because you're like, well, it should be simple. Why am I not just loving when I know this is the answer, but I'm not feeling it in my body?
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? So like Esther Hicks, who I love, a lot of her things is like, just be high vibe. And you're like, okay, well, just be happy. Okay. But like, what if all of this shit keeps coming up every time you try to do that, and then you start to feel bad about yourself for not raising your vibe?
Right.
What do you think about all that?
There's a couple things in that. So number one, you have to start going through the process of creating a rhythm out of the words you say.
Okay.
So a lot of individuals are like, I'm going to try, right? Yeah. If you say I'm going to try, then you're not actually doing.
Yes.
And so there's a difference between trying and doing. And once you start throwing yourself, even if you do it 5 times a day, that 5 times a day, you just go to 6 the next day, you go to 7 the next day. So you start creating a rhythmic state of permanence in your life off of the actual words you use and off of the intentions that you place into that. What'll happen after that is the intentions have to be connected to integrity. And so integrity allows us to actually have grounding in it. And what happens in most modern spirituality is people aren't grounded. And so we hear about integration work, integrity, integration, right? Yeah. Those two things going together. You hear about integration work as being able to ground out the intentions that you set. It's really great to be able to get in your heart and think positive, right? It's like, oh yeah, I did that. And all of a sudden you go to these retreats or you do some plant medicine or you end up meeting with somebody. And within those different spaces, it's like you have this really blissful experience, but you're like a rocket ship with no rudder and that has no place to come back. Back to the law of correspondence, SpaceX even did a beautiful job of they quit burning away rockets all the time. They started learning how to land them. They started learning how to conserve. They started learning how to bring things back home. So even if we use that as an example of a law of correspondence of looking at the evidence that we're giving ourselves around, we're not just throwing fucking rockets into space and burning them up and taxpayers billions of dollars a year. We're starting to land the things back in our life that we're going out and exploring. And when we can bring that back home and ground those in an integrous way, then the integration, the integrity that we have is tied back to the intention, and we're starting to bring our grounded purpose to our divine purpose back together. And that's the only way we're able to get into our heart. So
what is this integrity you talk about? Because you talk about this a lot. So what do you mean by integrity?
So
you don't mean moral integrity.
Not moral integrity, because moral
Fuck
is. I mean, you'll walk with moral integrity because you are the creator of your truth, right? So when you become the creator of your truth based on morals, then at which point you're not going to do something that's going to hurt other individuals, right? But integrity is if you say you're going to do something, do it. One of the things that happened with me is, and I have this, I did a little podcast about it the other day where I was talking about, I woke up and said, I'm going to go to the gym today.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to the gym. And so I was in integrity of the things that I told and committed to myself to. What happens is that you have a very divine timeline that's based on you actually flowing into your intentions and into your integrity every single day. The minute you have an intention and you divert your integrity somewhere else, whether it's off a distraction, whether it's off you getting caught up in somebody else's nonsense, whatever it might be, out of some vibration that is not aligned with the way that you set your intention out of love, you now basically split and fracture your reality. And it's almost like in like Doctor Strange, I don't know if you've watched it, or any of these movies, the minute you like pierce the actual veil, all of a sudden it's good to pierce the veil, but then you see this fracturing start to happen. Now you're over here. And it's like a plane veering 2 degrees off course. It literally will end up somewhere else.
It also feels like leaking energy.
Super leaky energy.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah. Super leaky energy. You're all over the place. And so the thing that you do is that the minute you know you flowed out of integrity, you didn't keep your word to somebody. It could be something as simple like saying, I'm going to get a presentation over to you today. I'm going to be on this phone call. You stop pushing phone calls. You show up to the things that people are intended for you to show up into. What is interesting is that once you're really in integrity with it, and you say, for instance, there's something else that you like to do, those calls will start to disappear, but it's not you doing it to actually remove them from the calendar. It's like that person all of a sudden shifted because you need to go do something else. But you're in such integrity that the divine roller coaster of your life starts to move the illusions around you in order for you to be able to actually stay in integrity of what it knows to be true for you. And now you're starting to make adjustments in your life out of those aspects of things.
Okay, so you do talk about divine roller coaster of your life. What does this roller coaster look like? And what if your roller coaster looks like a really shitty carnival ride with a carny who has hepatitis A through K?
Dude, if you've got that one, that's not the divine roller coaster.
That's not divine. So what is this? Yeah, what does this divine roller coaster look like in your mind?
I mean, you can either call it the blueprint of your life.
Yes.
You can call it the God's plan. You can call it any of those things. But the minute that you were born into this world, it was the same moment, okay, from a divine timeline or an entire spiritual timeline of things that God spoke, who am I, into existence. And in that moment, there was an infiniteness that expanded from there that basically gave you a plan, a blueprint, something to walk within. And there's choice in that plan for you to be able to stay on it or veer off of it.
You would say it's pretty elastic too, right?
Very elastic.
Yeah. It's not like because that's why I don't like the destiny. There's only one person for you. You have to, no. Yeah. There's endless possibilities for you, but I do agree some feel better.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Some are more in line.
Yeah, and all of that, here's the thing, the divine roller coaster isn't a course of actions or the depiction of the illusion as we walk through life. It's not the reality that we perceive to live. It's the energy that we flow within that alternates the reality from the perspective of where we were. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if we were, let's say all of a sudden, my divine roller coaster, the minute that I was born, was like, oh, you're going to have this very specific plan. It wasn't necessarily you're going to go to this school, you're going to be this person, you're going to marry these people, you're going to do all of that.
You're going to rollerblade.
What it was is that at some point in your life, you are going to have a very expansive awareness that's going to allow you to be able to change the world that you live in and change the entire world around you.
Fuck yeah.
So you change yourself, you change your experiences, you change the world that you're in, you change the reflection of the people in your life, but you change it from an energetic, like you're speeding up your vibration. And that's your divine roller coaster. It's not like, oh, like I'm supposed to do these 20 things. It's actually, I'm supposed to be this vibration state, and wherever I'm planted in the world at that moment in time is perfect. And if that's the perfection, then at which point I just start to expand from there. Yeah. And then the world starts to basically move through me because I don't have a 3-dimensional plan of action on this planet. I have a 5-dimensional plan of wholeness on this planet.
I think too, going off this roller coaster thing, and you always say like, don't jump on someone else's roller coaster. I think for me, it's like figuring out what you really align with inside of yourself versus what you think you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
For example, for me is I'm supposed to be applying for jobs right now. I don't really even want to do that. Right. And it doesn't feel good, but the society is telling me apply for jobs.
Right.
You should have a job.
Right.
But like every time I'm creative, like talking to you, when I'm doing my podcast, when I'm with people that are like really inspiring, I feel lit up. Like yesterday, I came up with an idea for a new TV show. I put everything aside just so I could work on that because it felt so good in that moment. But it's like learning to trust that roller coaster versus society's roller. How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the process of, it's an illusion outside of you. You're getting signs that are telling you that you need to go within.
Yeah.
So all the time, it's like, well, the world's saying these things, and you know how that feels vibrationally. The minute that you start doing it, you start feeling ungrounded. You start feeling unsafe. You start feeling unsure. Your feelings are real. So our feelings are very real. And depending on how we construct this, like in our solar plexus is a container of our feelings. So the more that we actually construct like the wholeness of our solar plexus, we hold our feelings to the shape of the intention of our stress, our responses of our sympathetic nervous system. So the better that we can actually the more intentful that we can get with that, the more intentful that we hold our feelings, and then our feelings will actually give us the barometer or the understanding of what's really happening in our life. So then at which point, once you understand that like your feelings are either on center or off center, then you can say, okay, well, if I feel this way about it, I need to listen to those feelings. And it's not out of a feeling that I need to go deeper into a rabbit hole.
Yes.
You're actually looking for or knowing that your truth is this other thing. And then once you actually step into the thing like what you did yesterday, like, for instance, I'm writing a TV show. This felt like bliss.
Yes, it was bliss.
When I do this feels like bliss.
And it was flow, too. Someone's the great definition of flow is you never get bored, but it's also like you don't, time disappears, you never get bored. And it's this really beautiful line between like limitless action and feeling great and not having it be too hard. Yeah. That's exactly where it was.
100%. And you love working. Like you work your ass off.
Yes.
And you take this vessel and you expand in such a beautiful way and you just go for it. Every single time.
1:52.
Okay, all right.
What time you got? 2?
2 o'clock. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm checking. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We're gonna just only show this part.
We'll cut that part out.
So, okay, just to go back. So, how do we just consistently learn to trust ourselves more and believe? I think it's the fear of like, well, if I don't apply for jobs, or for people, it's like, I need to text this person that I'm interested today because if I don't text them, then they're not going to be into me. And there's a way to be in a relationship. There's a way to get money. There's a way, like, and so if we feel like we're not living in that way, then we're fucking up. Right. But what you're saying is there's this whole other divine way that the doors will be easier, more expansive, and more open.
Yeah. And one word that you said in that thing that you said, what you just said a second ago, is when you start using ifs, right? That starts to, that becomes the thing that you create conditionality around.
Great.
And the conditionality isn't unconditional love. It's not full surrender. It's when you're in full surrender and receivership, it's a matter of a win, not an if.
Oh.
Right? So you move from if to win, and the win is now, because all you have is now, and then it just comes because you open yourself up to receive. And when you're opening yourself up to receive, you literally are in an unconditional love space because you also recognize that you created it all to love yourself.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, can you say that again?
I mean, you realize you created it all to love yourself because you open yourself up to fully receive. And it's and what we've done as humanity is we have been in such this patriarchal state to where there's this actually doing condition, the if. And the if is not now. The if is, I'm not sure.
And if is also a lot of times like the worst case scenario.
Right.
If I don't do this, then I'll miss my flight. I'll do that. Like it's always the worst thing.
Yeah. It's nuts. And we have the ability to just remove the if, move into the when, start to receive, be in full surrender. We remove the conditions and then things just are, but you do it from a beautiful heart space of grounded purpose and divine purpose mixed together.
Can you move your body into everyone else's body? Just figure this out. All right. So one of the things I want to go before you got 6 minutes. I really want to talk to you about. You had this great video. Someone asked you a question, and you said, "All of life, it's all love. We just transmute it with our definitions of it." So I love that you said that. But what happens is when I have this conversation with people, right away, everyone always brings up the worst shit in the world. Mm-hmm. What about murder, poverty in Africa, mass shootings, Old Navy? How do you explain those to people? I know we don't have to explain them, but I would love to know, how do you see those things? The worst, quote, worst stuff.
One thing I recognize is that there is a divine creator that's bigger than us.
Yeah.
given the fact that there's a divine creator, that divine creator created everything, every experience we have on this earth, everything we've ever experienced historically, now, and in the future. If that's been created by the divine creator and all of it was created out of love, then the logic states, if I do the math, simple enough, that those things are loving entities. They're loving aspects of self. When a baby cries, it's not a beautiful sound, right? But it cries in order to be fed. So if society is crying, which it has been, right? A lot. Global warming, DJs, murder, anything that's ever happened, slavery, things that we do to ourselves, me slitting my wrist in my 20s, me going to prison, those are little micro things, but there's bigger aspects of it. When those things have been there, they were all the baby or the child crying. Oh. And what happens is when we can separate ourselves far enough from that child crying with a distance of saying, okay, this is actually a really beautiful thing. Because when you're close to it, it's hard.
Totally. Yeah. Someone who's just had their spouse murdered, it's very hard to have this conversation, and I get it.
But the same person who had their spouse murdered, the further they get away from that, okay, they're like, wow, that person's purpose was so intentful. They start to go through the process, through their grief, in order to actually love, not the situation, but to love themselves more, because it becomes a reflection of self. When all of those things start to happen, you back away from it a little bit. And some people say time heals, but you can also just zoom out and be like, oh, well, that's what that was there for.
Yeah.
And it's a challenging thing because, when I'm sitting in the hospital getting my wrist stitched up because I decided to be an idiot and cut them, or when my first several days in prison were very hard for me. I wasn't in this state of awareness at all.
It's because you were hot. Don't be hot in prison.
but it was challenging then. So I have all the compassion for people who are close to the issue. But my encouragement for them is how quickly can you get into the now? And there's a thing that astronauts go through called the overview effect. When they zoom out of the Earth and they're basically going into space and look back on it, they're like, whoa. Like, this is a totally different.
Everything is small. I talk about this with airplane pilots. On my podcast all the time, I say you never see a stressed out airplane pilot ever because their view is always here.
It's totally different. Yeah.
It's always, but it's the same reality.
Yeah.
We're looking at the same things.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's essentially just that law of correspondence. Like, you have all these things that are around us. Like, I'm sure there's dirt in my rug.
Yes.
And I'm sure at that, fiber of rug, that dirt is fucking miserable. For that fiber of the rug, right? But the whole rug is like, well, this is great because it's not a big deal, and I'll vacuum it out, and that one little thing will feel better once I do that. But our thing is can we actually macro out in order to sit at the seat of God to be able to actually see why it was all created from an entire architecture? And then once we see that, the problem will dissipate, and not the fact that we don't learn to deal with it with compassion and love and forgiveness. We just move into the state to where we apply such a loving energy on it from the perspective of the all. And what I do is I go back and I say, okay, well, God, you created this for me.
Yeah.
To love me more. I'm going to go back and actually forgive you for actually creating this drama because it hurt me, but also I hurt you. And then when we bring those two things together, we just fall back in love with ourselves.